I'm going to go check, make sure this stream is live and active, so bear with me one moment while I do that. So I'm going to make sure everything is up while I welcome you all and people are entering. There we go. Looks good. So once again, thank you for joining me here. I'm Dr. B, and what I'm going to be doing is talk about a few topics to get things started, and after that I'm going to take questions from you all in the chat. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it there. I'll be looking after a little while. So first off, I left on the board, this was from my music theory class from Friday, yesterday, and we were talking about diatonic seventh chords. So, I kind of mentioned that normally we have kind of like the frequency in which seventh chords are used. This is particularly we're talking about for classical music. So the 5/7 was like the number one seventh chord that was used. By number one meaning the most commonly used. After that, the 2/7 chord. And the 2/7 chord, and then finally the 7/7. These three really made up the overwhelming majority of seventh chords that were used by people like Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. So if you are trying to compose something that has that feeling, that has that style, you want to limit yourself to using 5/7, 2/7, and 7/7. When you get a little further on in the history, you start finding composers in the Romantic era, in the 19th century, more and more using things like 4/7 is probably the next most common, followed by 1/7. And then even later on, late Romantic, particularly when you get to people like Debussy, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, you find things like I think these are probably a tie, the 3 major 7 and 6, the 3/7 and 6/7. So, I guess I'll just put 6/7 like that. So there's a historical context in terms of using these diatonic seventh chords that if you're composing for a specific style that's from a particular time period, you want to be aware of. Then what I did is for my students, I wrote out what the sonorities would be for all the diatonic seventh chords in a major key as well as those in a minor key. And this is just worth remembering and understanding our notation here. So the Roman numeral 1 is uppercase because it has a major third. Anytime you have a major third interval, the third of the chord is major, use uppercase Roman numeral. And then, if it has a major 7, you use capital M7. Now, this is one of those areas of music theory where it's not 100% standardized. So there's some people that use different methods. I particularly like this one. The capital M differentiates it from uppercase Roman numeral 5, 7. When you just put the 7, that implies a minor 7th above the bass. Whereas when you put the capital M, you're talking about a major 7. So you make it visually clearer by using that way of notating it to show that. So when you have a minor third, as in a major key, as in the 2 chord, the 3 chord, and the 6 chord, we use lowercase for anything that has a minor third interval. And then it does have a minor 7, so we don't need to do anything other than put the 7 there. Okay? Keep in mind, there are seventh chord sonorities that are not up here and are not indicated. There are 5 of the most common, the 5 most common seventh chord sonorities are the only ones, they're the ones that we're talking about here, right? So those are major, major 7, major, minor 7, minor, minor 7, diminished, minor 7, and diminished, diminished 7. Those are the 5 common, most common seventh chord structures. And there's more, and they sound awesome. But what we're doing here is right now is we're kind of understanding this from a historical perspective. And certainly you can go and experiment with it because really these chords are functioning more, the power of their root is the most important thing. So by changing the sonority, you can still establish certain kind of tonal relationships by the root movement. It's more complicated than that, but that's at least a starting spot. So a little refresher. The first letter in this designation indicates the kind of triad that is in this seventh chord. And the second part, the second letter and number, indicate the interval for the seventh. So when we say major, major 7, what we're really saying is major triad with a major 7 on top of it. So that's our naming format, and that's good for you to remember just to keep that clear. What I think is worth pointing out for you all, if you haven't thought about it intensely, it's worth thinking about now. Take a look at all the sonorities that are the same, right? So 1 and 4 in a major key are both major, major 7s. And then when we look at a minor key, 3 and 6 are both major, major 7s. So if I write here, what are all the major, major 7 sonorities? 1 major 7, 4 major 7, 3 major 7, 6 major 7. And I'm talking diatonically. I'm not talking chromatically, where we make chromatic alterations to the chords or use mode mixture or any of that. We're talking about diatonic 7th chords, using the notes that are in the key. But we have 4 different major, major 7s. And let's think about what that means. If I tell you the chord is C major 7, and I say, what Roman numeral does that get? Your answer should be, I don't know, Dr. B. I need to know the context before I can figure that out. And actually, let me change it, because let me change it to G major 7, okay? So G major 7. Now listen to this. I'm going to play it. I'm going to start with the G major 7, and then I'm going to move to a cadence. And it's going to be different depending on what it's functioning as. So let's say we go like this. Let me play that again. So with that progression, if you've gotten your ear training skills really, really good, and you listen to that bass movement, you would recognize, you'd be able to figure out by context that this G major is a 6th major 7. I then go to a 2 half-diminished 4/3, 5, I'm switching, to 5/7, 2/1, which would mean that we are in the key of B minor, right? That's kind of worth knowing, because how is this going to be valuable? Modulation. If you review my lesson on modulation, the most common way to modulate is to use something called a pivot chord. A pivot chord is a chord that exists in more than one key. We know that any major 7 sonority exists in exactly 4 different keys. So I play a G major 7, I can go from one of these to any other of the 3. And so let me give you another example of how this might work. Let me give you another version. I'm starting with the same G major 7. See if you can figure out, using your ear, which one of these keys we're in and how it's functioning. So here's my G major 7. do that one again for you. Second hearing, right? All right, so in this case, I started with the G major 7, and the bass went like this, which is a very common bass function. That's really what you want to listen for when you're trying to figure this out. I start, the G major 7, it functions as a 3 major 7. I then went to 4. I then went to 1 6 4, meaning not functioning as a 1 chord, but written as a 1 chord, to 5 to 1. And this means that this would be in the key of E minor. So a good way to test yourself is to take any one of these sonorities and see if you can name all the different keys how it would function, right? So if I have a G major 7, it's 6 major 7 in the key of B minor. It is 3 majors of the 7 in the key of E minor. It's 1 major 7 in the key of G major. And it is 4 major 7 in the key of D major. Which means that you can modulate in between any one of these keys using a major 7 sonority. And that's kind of exciting to play around with as a composer, and as you're analyzing music, it's kind of neat to try to be aware of those things. If we look and say, well, what about our minor 7, our minor 7 sonority? How many options are there? So we've got 2 7, 3 7, 6 7, 1 7, 4 7. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options. 5 options. So minor 7 gets 5 options. Major 7 gets 4 options. The dominant 7, the major minor 7, it's only 1 option, right? This is kind of interesting, right? It only functions as 5 7. So 5 7 is not a great pivot chord, or a major minor 7 is not always a great pivot chord unless you're using it as a secondary function, a non-diatonic major minor 7. But diatonically speaking, you cannot really just go back and forth between the parallel major and minor. Half-diminished 7, so that would be minor diminished 7. There's only 1. Diminished 7. There's only 1. So really, the real excitement, if you're going to use pivot chords, is the major 7 and the minor 7. So just a little something that I was talking about with my class that I thought was worth kind of wrapping your head around. And so a good way to test yourself is make sure you can spell all your different sonorities. So give just any random bass note, be able to spell all 5 different sonorities. And then, knowing that, just take a major 7, any major 7 arpeggio, and then see if you can name all 4 keys it could function in. And then do the same thing with the minor 7s. And that is a great little music theory exercise for you all to work on. So, let me erase all this good stuff. And I wanted to talk about one other topic, because I had 2 short topics today to talk about. It's actually the second week of classes for me at my college. And so I've been a very busy professor getting my students up to speed and getting the semester started. So as much as I wanted to sink my teeth into analyzing some Rachmaninoff and some of the other more extensive questions, the time for that was sadly just not there. So our next topic that I did want to, that I was able to just do a very little preparation on it, just so I can give you some good stuff, is Hemiola. But before I talk about Hemiola, I wanted to give a little plug for a book that came out recently. Came out just the end of last year. It's a book called Bob Mark's 88 Keys to Successful Singing Performances. All right? And so I have to admit, straight up front, I am a biased, critic of this. And the reason I'm biased is because I do know Bob Marks personally, and I'm married to the co-author, Elizabeth Gerby. That said, if you are a singer and you want a really practical, step-by-step process on learning to be a good singer, specifically also talking about how to nail an audition, this is a fantastic book. The same approach that I use to music theory, where it's trying to break things down to a very hierarchical, step-by-step process that makes it as easy as possible, that's exactly the method that Bob and Elizabeth are using in this book. Bob Marks specializes in coaching musical theater performers. So for those of you who are young and thinking about what kind of careers can I have in music, vocal coach is not one that most people are aware of. But Bob here has worked with Daniel Radcliffe, Sarah Jessica Parker, Ariana Grande, like super names. And he works with lots and lots of kids as well. So if you go to any musical on Broadway, there's a chance that you're listening to someone that had taken a lesson with Bob Marks. If they're a kid in particular, he's like the go-to guy. So he's really good at breaking it down so that a kid could pick it up quickly and do a great job. But it applies to adults as well. So if you're looking for something on how to be a better singer, how to deal with performances and auditions and all that stuff, this is a great book. And think about this as a career. Your primary instrument is going to be piano. You don't have to be the greatest singer, but you do got to know your music theory. You do got to know how to arrange things and adjust it and change keys to suit the voice for a singer. And you do need to know about the voice and understand how it works so that you can coach people. So I'd like to endorse this book and let you know it's available. You can get it on Amazon. It's not an expensive book. It's very affordable. So I hope for my singers who are out there, you go ahead and buy this book. You won't regret it. All right. Another quick announcement that I wanted to make. We now have on Facebook Dr. B Music Theory Facebook page, and I'm on that very rarely, so I'm not really hands-on with that. But we have an awesome moderator who makes sure things are running smoothly, and we've got 155 people subscribed to it. So it's small, it's intimate, and that allows is it allows people to post a question, to post a piece of music they've composed or arranged, and ask for feedback. And I'd like to give a shout out to Danny Pippin, who's the moderator and keeps things rolling, as well as Emile Ross. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing the first name Emily, probably Emily Ross, who someone asked a question and she gave a really awesome, helpful answer. And that's very much what I like to see. I think, I would love to answer everyone's questions. It's one of the reasons I do this live video on YouTube every other week. So the next one will be coming up in 2 weeks, same time, Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern. But I get so many awesome comments on my YouTube channel, and that's where this next question about Hemiola comes from. But I'm sad, I just don't have enough time to answer everyone's question. So this Facebook group is a way for you to get some feedback when I'm not able to give it to you. And by people who have been watching the same videos, who understand that process, and who are welcoming to beginners to more advanced music theory practitioners. So, Emily, good job. All right, so this question comes from Rajshri Thakur, and he was asking me about Hemiola. And so Hemiola is a topic that deals with rhythm. So we're talking about rhythm here, which is fun because we usually spend so much time talking about the pitches and the notes. But as you know, if you've been a Dr. B Music Theory watcher, you know that I think that the rhythm is something that's not discussed as much as even I should be doing. I should talk about it more. So Hemiola is really, and I'm going to read a textbook definition and then comment on that. So I'm going to read for you. Hemiola refers to a rhythmic pulse pattern that utilizes a duple meter and a triple meter playing at the same time against and on top one another. All right, so let's break down that, and there's more to it than that. But it's the idea of duple and triple happening at the same time, rhythmically. So we have to back up because we want to understand this at the deepest level. If we have, let's say, a meter of 3/4, what that means is that there are 3 beats per measure and the quarter note equals 1 beat. So if we were to just write out the beat, it would look like 3 quarter notes, just like that. And what we know is that beat 1 is the loudest beat. It's the accent. It's what's called the strong beat. That's how we know it's 1, and then 2 and 3 are softer, less accented. So so the beat is your kind of steady pulse. But if I were to just clap a steady pulse, can you tell if this is 3/4, 4/4, 5/4? I'm trying to cap at exactly the same volume for all of them. So there's no way you can know. The only way you can know what the meter is if one of those beats is louder than the others. So if I were to go like this, you would be able to say, ah, I hear loud, soft, 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 loud, soft, 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 which means a pattern of 4, right? So loud, soft, soft, soft. And to do it really accurate, I would go loud, soft, medium, soft, because that's what 4/4 or any kind of quadruple meter is usually structured, right? But you have the steady pulse, that's your beat. Your meter is determined by the accent on beat 1 being the loudest. So within of these beats, you'll have subdivisions. So you could say 1 and 2 and 3 and you have a, let's say if we were to write out that subdivision, it would be a series of eighth notes. And you'll notice that I beam them in groups of 2 so that it's clear where the beat is. The beat is every 2 of these eighth notes. This is why beaming is important. It allows the performer to visually see where the beat is, and that's critical. But if we're going along and we have our meter and we're trucking along in 3/4, sometimes composers like to have some variety to keep things interesting and to make things exciting. And Hemiola is a way for you to introduce the unexpected as a composer, as an arranger, and a way for you to build a certain amount of tension, and then if you resolve it correctly, a great feeling of relaxation, culmination. It's a wonderful element to build up the energy and make it feel like something glorious when you start with 1 meter, you go into the other meter, the Hemiola, which I'll write out soon. And then when you go back, it's the going back that's the release of that energy. It gives that yeah, you made it kind of feeling. So let's see how in 3/4, this one's like the most common. And some people, when they talk about Hemiola, only talk about 3/4 as if it was the only way you could have Hemiola. But it's broader than that. It's anything where you're having duple versus triple, kind of like you're starting with one, you then implying the other. So there's a couple different options. So I should slow it down a little bit, right? So you start with either duple or triple. So this would be 3/4 would be a triple meter. And then you can either go to the other one and then come back. So the Hemiola is the part where you're going to the other. I'm just writing it out here. So you can go duple meter as your foundation. You go to the triple meter, that's your Hemiola section. Then you go back to duple. All that tension that you built up during the hemiola is released, and you get this very satisfying resolution. Or you start triple, you then move to duple. When you come back to triple, same thing. Or in this middle section, it could be both at the same time, which is going to be even more kind of tension. So it all depends on how much tension and how much energy you want built up there, which one of those options you're going to choose. But let's say, and I wrote out these 6/8 notes. What if instead I go and I beam them like this? I beam 3/8 notes together, and I put an accent on beat 1 where we expect it to be, but I put it here on the 4/8 note, which in 3/4 would be the and of 2. So if I'm going along and I'm going 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and then all of a sudden I'm going 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. What's being implied when I shift the accent away from beat 2, so what used to be accent on beat 1, slight smaller accent on 2 and 3, right? So it's not that 2 and 3 are unaccented, they're a beat. They're a pulse. By definition, that means there's an accent. If I shift it from 2 and 3 to the and of 2, now what I am implying is a meter of 6/8, which is a duple meter. This is a compound meter because there's three subdivisions within every beat. So compound meter, whenever we have a 6, this is called a duple meter. Okay, so the 3 means that we have a triple meter. The 6 means we have a duple meter. I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but I do have one of my early lesson videos that talks about a little bit more about those metric structures, so you can watch that for a little further information. But 6/8 is not really felt as 6 beats. It's felt as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the 1 and 4 of the 8th notes is really the feeling of beat 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. That's how you would count 6/8. So you can count what's called the little beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or you can count the big beat, the 1 and a 2 and a 1, 2. But if we're going along and we have dun 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 dum bum 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 ba da 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 dum. So I just sang something in triple meter, and then I did a couple measures in duple, and then I just stopped on beat 1. I should do a better version. So to show you the release of the energy, dum 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 dum, and then I went back. Now think about, let's say, a piano player who could keep the bum 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 and go ba 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 with the right hand. Then you would have triple and duple occurring at the same time. That is hemiola. That's what hemiola is. And there's a lot of different variations on that. So the 3/4 versus the 6/8 is really common, but check out these other options, right? Because it's definitely more complex than that. And actually, before I give you some of the other examples, let me read the remainder of this definition for you. Okay, I'll start with the same thing. Hemiola refers to a rhythmic pulse pattern that utilizes a duple meter and a triple meter playing at the same time against and on top of one another. But it doesn't actually need to be against and on top. It could be alternating between the two. And you still will get that sense of hemiola. So I would like to modify that definition a little bit. Okay. They say, for example, a bar of piano music in 6/8 that has 2 dotted quarter notes, a triple division in the right hand, and 3 quarter notes, a duple division in the left, would be considered hemiola, which is one of the examples I just talked about. Hemiola has a profound effect on pulse perception because it is introducing a new pulse in the music without letting the old one go. The listener is then confronted with the choice of whether to accept the new pulse as the primary one or stick to the old one, confusing some listeners yet engaging others. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's If you were to switch without having both at the same time, there's a certain amount of time where the old pulse will be remembered and you'll be sticking with it. And if you just go to the other, it'll feel like Hemiola for a little while, and then eventually you will change to that one if you don't go back to the old one. If you're keeping both going at the same time, that's exactly what happens. You as a listener are like, well, which one's the primary? Because your brain automatically tries to figure out primary, secondary. It does the same thing with melody. So when you're thinking about, let's say, a Bach 4-part fugue, there's a primary melody, often called the subject in the fugue, and then a counter subject, often the secondary melody, but not always. Even if the subject becomes the secondary melody, there is always one melody that's the primary melody and another melody that's the secondary melody, and then others that are kind of filling that in. And sometimes when you talk about Renaissance music, that's still a consideration where you have this 4-part counterpoint, 6-part counterpoint. There's usually one melody that's dominant, but it might change which voice it's in, which is one of the things that the listener is confronted with. Just like the listener is confronted with Hemiola, as opposed to trying to decide, do I stick with the old primary meter or go with the new meter? The same thing is for counterpoint. Does the listener stick with the old primary melody or transition to the new primary melody? And what happens is that gives a little bit of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not always a bad thing. Sometimes uncertainty means, ooh, I don't know what to expect. Something exciting might be on the way. Or uncertainty, for some people, will mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm really afraid it's going to be terrible. So part of this music is, this is the subjective aspect of music. The music has a specific feeling, but different people like different levels of uncertainty. There's some people who are big risk takers and they're fine with it. Like, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I'll move on. And there's other people who are deathly afraid of anything kind of risky at all, or any uncertainty of any kind. So keep in mind that we're talking about musical elements that create emotions, but then different people react differently as to whether that's an emotion they're comfortable with or not, and to what degree. So let's talk about some of the other examples. So let's say we're in 3/4, and let's say we've got the left hand of the piano playing our quarter notes, but let's say the right hand is playing something that looks like this. So quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 here in the left hand. And in the right hand, half notes, 3 of them, as if we're going 1, 2, 3. As if we're slowing down the beat. And by putting that accent, so putting that accent on what would be the old beat 3 and the old beat 2 now is implying a new meter. It's like it's almost like this becomes like 6/4 is the new implied meter. Not even 6/4. As like a 3/2, I should say, is being a new implied meter over that. So Hemiola does not need to occur just within a single measure. It can go over a span of measures. And again, we can see how we have this 1 meter and another being implied on top of it, and they can both happen. And you can also do this in terms of repeated syncopated patterns. So I'm going to give you 2 more. So let's say we're in 3/4. Let's keep it in 3/4. So we got 1, 2, 3. Actually, I'm going to have more than that in terms of examples, because there's so much kind of cool stuff to talk about. But let's say on the right hand so we have quarter notes in the left hand in 3/4. In the right hand we have dotted quarter note, 8th note. This is our cell. This is our pattern. This is very much like the one we just did, but it's a rhythmic pattern. And then we do the same rhythmic pattern. Essentially a dotted quarter, eighth. Let me make sure I did this right. There we go. So, in one hand we might have, and I'm not a piano player, so I'm messing that up, but you have, so we go bum, bum, I'm sorry. So you could have something like that that's implying yet another kind of like the same kind of thing of that 3-2 that we're talking about. This is really functioning as if this half note, but it's a rhythm within that. So keep in mind, Hemiola doesn't have to just be all the same rhythm of just a beat. It can actually be a rhythm that's implying a different meter, like this example here with the dotted quarter eighth note repeated pattern. Let me say that again. Hemiola does not have to just be two beats going against each other. It could be a rhythm in one meter versus a rhythm in another meter, which is a little more sophisticated. Good. Let's take a look at 4/4. Let's not leave out 4/4 because it happens there too. Normally we have 1, 2, 3, 4. But what if we could have a bunch of dotted quarter notes? So we go, actually not dotted quarter notes, I'm sorry, quarter note triplets. So if we put triplets in here, especially quarter note triplets, we can be going along at 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, da, 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 which could kind of feel like 6/4, right? If these were not quarter note triplets and there were just 6 of them within the same period of time, we take out the 3 bracket, we would call it 6/4. Yet another option. What if in 4/4, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger because this is going to span many measures, I played just a bunch of series of dotted quarter notes. So dotted quarter notes are really fun. I'm just writing it out here and then I'll tell you all what it is exactly that's happening. All right. So what I did here is in 4/4, I wrote out dotted quarter notes, which would fall on 1, and of 2, 4, and of 1, 3, and of 4, 2, and of 3, 1. So it takes a total of 3 measures before this Hemiola comes back to the accent of the original. So if we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's how long it takes. That's how long the Hemiola goes. And so if you listen to a lot of jazz music, this is really common. This kind of Hemiola is rhythmically something that's very common from like African rhythms combining with the Western European tradition. And this in particular was used extensively by saxophonists like John Coltrane in the 1960s, where you'd have these pieces where, you know, a whole four measures or 3 measures plus, they might extend it a little bit, and they would still keep the 4-bar phrase, but you know, you would have all these Hemiolas. And I've played with some of these guys who do this stuff, and it's so easy for me as a performer to get lost on where's beat 1. Where's beat 1 of the 4-measure phrase? Because you get lost in the ba da da da, you know, because you're playing that. And the drummer for John Coltrane was Elvin Jones, and he was a master at these polyrhythms, sometimes called polyrhythms. This Hemiola aspect of more than 1 meter going against each other. So that's a little something that I haven't really delved into and certainly nowhere near as extensively as I just did, but something that's really exciting for music and worth paying attention to. So I'm going to turn to the chat now, and we're going to see what's going. All right, we've got greetings from Croatia. Hello back. And let's see what else we got here. Some of the other. Hey, Caleb, good to see you. Here's another one question. It says, do colleges in the States teach arrangement techniques for a sax performance major student in an undergraduate course? So that's an interesting question. So usually in the United States, you declare a major. In your major, if you're a saxophonist, is usually going to be either as a jazz saxophonist or a classical saxophonist. It's rare that you do both. You usually pick stylistically which one you're going to do. And when you do, it's usually performance related. It's not dealing too much with arranging. You have other majors for composition, and usually your composition classes, and you might deal with it a little bit in composition. It's actually most commonly found in the music theory sequence. So later on, third or fourth semester, you often take an orchestration class where you learn about the arranging techniques for all the standard instruments. And saxophone would be included, at least in terms of understanding its transposition and its range and some of its essential tonal aspects. But as an undergrad, you don't necessarily go too deep into the techniques of arranging for saxophone. You'll get it a little bit in your kind of music theory sequence in an orchestration class. You might get it a little bit in a composition major. You might get it a little bit if that's something you're interested in as a saxophone performer. You would probably need to volunteer and say that you're interested in that, because a lot of these college ensembles will have a jazz big band which has 5 saxophones. And I know that when I did my undergraduate, I wrote a couple pieces for my college big band. So I kind of learned, and then the faculty person would just give me feedback on that. So it wasn't necessarily a course that I had to study, but I was interested in that, so I got the feedback. So you have to kind of seek that out. If you're a classical saxophone major, you could be arranging things for a saxophone quartet or for a large saxophone ensemble, which is essentially like it's like a string orchestra but with saxophones. So that's how the norm works for undergraduate degrees here in the States. We got a good morning from LA. Well, I'm sure it's warmer over there than it is here. I'm in New York State. We've got Pranav saying, hey Pranav, I've posted my composition in the Facebook group. Please do have a look and share your thoughts. Yeah, I will, Pranav, I'll make a note to take a look myself. But as I mentioned earlier, this is something, if anyone is part of that Facebook group, that you can go ahead and give some comments and feedback. Hey, good morning, Ron. We've got some other hellos. Oh, thanks, Pranav. I just had an interview come out in a paper about talking about how I kind of my saxophone journey and how I got started, and by different teachers and things I studied. So just had an interview published in online. So got someone who already checked it out and looked at it. That's awesome. More thank yous, or rather more hellos. Good. Boleros loves the topic. I'm so glad. I heard that, this is from Danny, I've heard that a 2 half-diminished is seen as a dominant functioning chord in certain cultures. I believe in South American music. Your thoughts? So if you write 2 half-diminished, so here's my question for you, Danny, and I'm gonna be a stickler, just so that the terminology is super clear and that we all are on the same page in terms of understanding what we're saying. So you wrote 2 half-diminished. The real is 2 half-diminished 7. I know the 7's implied because you can't have a half-diminished not 7. But I want to make sure, the reason I say that is that you're not assuming 2 diminished. Because 2 diminished in terms of sonority is the same sonority as 7 diminished, right? And we know that 7 diminished is absolutely a substitution for 5. It's essentially like a 5-7 without the root. In terms of 2 half-diminished 7 functioning as a dominant, I don't know. That's an interesting question. In terms of South American music, I've kind of studied Brazilian music, especially Bossa and that kind of style of Brazilian music, a little bit of samba. And I've studied music from Argentina, so tango and things of that nature. But I'm definitely not an expert in all of that music, and so I don't know. That's a great question. So that might be worth looking up. Danny also asks about the Lament bass, and you did spell Lament correctly. So I'm assuming this is about. I would have to look it up, but here's what I would direct you to look up. Henry Purcell was an English composer from the Baroque era. Dido's Lament, which is a very famous opera aria that has a repeating bass line. It's in minor, and I'm trying to remember. I think that's it. I think that's the. In the first lyrics are, when I am laid in earth, when I am laid in earth. So meaning when I'm buried. So when I die and have been buried, there's a bunch of instructions on what they would like to see happen. It's a wonderful piece of music, very famous, definitely has withstood the test of time. So I think it's G minor. Boom. We go to G up the octave, and we kind of descend chromatically. Actually, boom. I'm not quite sure what the meter. Is it a 6? Maybe it's in 6/4. So it might be this, now that I'm thinking about it. I don't think I quite have. This is definitely not right rhythmically, but I think this is essentially what we're doing. We're going. We start on do, and then we start going to ti, te, la, le, sol, me, fa, sol, back to do. So look this one up. I think this is what the famous Lament bass line that people talk about. And what's neat about it's also called a ground bass. And it's similar to a passacaglia. And what's neat about that is that for the listener, you have the repetition of that bass line. So it's almost like theme and variations, with the bass being. It's like theme and variations, but instead of a melodic theme, it's a bass repetition. It's like a repeated bass line that really gives you that. And on top of that, you have all the different harmonies and melodies that float over this kind of repetitive bass. It lends itself to this. It's such a powerful emotional song where it's just like the the sentiment is they've kind of accepted that they're going to die. And they want the people who survive them to remember all the good things about them, but to forget about their fate, the fact that they died. And just remember them, and don't allow their death to create worries or trouble. Just remember those good times. And it's like there's this level of acceptance in the way the music is constructed that's just, it's so, like I could feel myself getting choked up just talking about it, because it's when you have that realization that you're going to die, you loved life, and you want the people that survive you to remember. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want them to be upset. You want them to think about, but you don't want them to forget about you either. You want them to remember all those good things. And so powerful music, powerful stuff. There's other great examples of kind of using this kind of ground bass. And so I hope that answers your question to somewhat, Danny, and you can kind of look up and get a little bit more deeper in that. Got another question here. I was analyzing one of Bach's chorales and noticed something that I find weird. He's using the key signature of G major and E minor, 1 sharp, but the key is actually A minor. Why would he do that? You know, that's a great question. So here's what I've heard in terms of my researching of the history. Sometimes you'll even have a chorale that, there's a couple of reasons. One is that it's functioning in a larger context, like it's a part of a larger work, and the larger work is in A minor. So even though if E minor is the main key, the main key is E minor, and this part happens to be in A minor for just a little bit of time. I don't think that's what's happening in this particular situation that you're describing. So the other option is that it's modal, meaning that it's not your traditional A minor, it's more of a modal minor. And I think what you have to remember is that when we're talking about Bach, we're talking about 1685 to 1750, and tonality is new. It's still new. This whole idea of the major and minor scales and stuff that we talk about here, this is still relatively new. Before this, there was no concept. It was no concept of things functioning. Everything was more of a modality structure, and there were multiple forms of minor, right? So there would be like Dorian minor. There'd be Phrygian minor. There'd be Aeolian minor. And to be honest, none of them are the minor that we use today. It's closest to Aeolian, which is called the natural minor. But we raise the leading tone. And it doesn't do that in Aeolian. Right? Aeolian strictly is just the natural minor scale. So the minor key that we know and love is not something that really was being used in modal scale or structure, which was in practice all the way from ancient Greece, 500 BC, up until around 1600. Yeah, about almost 2,000 years of modality. Then around 1600, we get tonality. Now, Bach is 1685, but keep in mind, things don't change super quickly back in the 17th century. It's not like they're looking stuff up on the internet and being like, ooh, there's this new tonality thing, let's all do that. It's coming about. Bach was part of the people who really fleshed out how tonality was going to work, but he was a church composer, and so there was a lot of that traditional aspect, traditional homage and respect for the tradition of the Renaissance, which was modal in its nature. So especially things that have a more religious flavor, and most of Bach's music is religious, or good portion of it is, it could easily have a modal flavor. So even though A is your tonal center, is it an A tonality like we expect with the raised leading tone? Is it partially modal for at least some of the time? Is he maybe mixing modality and tonality, going back and forth? Any one of those options is something that would not be surprising. So chances are that's what's going on. You know, when I talk to music theoreticians, they really say that, you know, the Roman numeral analysis that we use is not always appropriate for people like Bach. It's really more appropriate for people like Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven. But this whole Roman numeral analysis system sometimes does not work for Bach, which is kind of crazy because we talk about Bach so much. But you know, that's what they say. We've got another question here. Can you talk about upper structures used by composers such as Copland and Neo Morrison, who I covered recently? Hey, Elton, good to see you. Glad you're back. So Morrison, I don't know his music too much more than Cinema Paradiso. And so Morrison's use of upper structures is much more traditional and similar to French music like Debussy and Ravel and jazz. So if we were to do the lineage, I would say like Debussy, Ravel, these French composers. Then it kind of goes into a jazz tradition. Let's remember that for jazz we have the combination of African traditions from the slaves that came to the United States through the Caribbean often, mixing with Western European culture, and specifically mixing with the kind of interracial mixing of black and white, where you have the Creoles. And the Creoles were mixed heritage and often very well educated early on, before laws came into place that kind of like lumped anyone that had any African heritage into the same group. Creoles were considered a separate group. They were educated almost always in France, or not always, but often. You would have wealthy Creole families going and sending their kids off to France to be educated. So this French tradition of harmony from Debussy and Ravel gets absorbed through this kind of education into the jazz tradition. And then Morrison is very much taking that language and using it. So when we have like the theme from Cinema Paradiso that I analyzed recently, that's a 4/7 chord, a major minor 7 to a triad, still triads. Here's our 7th chord. Here's a half-diminished 7 chord. Here's a fully diminished. Major 7, fully diminished 7. And this is a 5 chord, but with a sus4, and maybe a flat 9 in there, in that last one. So the upper structures of this tradition is all tertial. And tertial means stacking thirds. So you might have D, F sharp, A, C, E flat. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It's every other letter if you go up the scale. So every other letter, tertial harmony stacked in thirds, and you can kind of just go up and use those sonorities. And just like there's certain 7th chords, the 5/7 chords that we were the 5 different sonorities of 7th chords that we were talking about earlier, there's common upper structure sonorities as well. So let's talk quickly about some of the most common ones, right? So very often you'll have things like major, minor, 7, flat 9, or a major, minor, 7 with a sharp 9 is very common. Sometimes major, minor, 7 with a natural 9. So then, so they would just say major, minor, 9. Or they might say major, minor, 7, add 9. Let's do that. I like that one. Add 9. Or a major, minor, 7, sharp 11. Those are the most common. And then major, minor, 13. Add 13. These are all common. Major, minor 7s are the chords that get the most upper structure variety. And in part that's because the major, minor 7 is often functioning as a 5 chord, as a dominant, which is basically the most tense chord. It's the most anticipatory chord because it's just about ready to go to 1. And so you can increase the dissonance of that 5 chord because you're resolving it right away to 1. So it allows itself to be altered. So minor, major 7s, you will never have the flat 9. I shouldn't say never. Rarely will you find the sharp. And actually, let me finish the major, minor 7 options. You can have flat 9, sharp 9, natural 9, sharp 11, 13, and you can even have a sharp 5, which is the same thing as saying a flat 13. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's like 6 different kind of upper structure opportunities there for a major, minor 7. By comparison, a major 7, you will not have in normal music a flat 9 or sharp 9. You'll just have the natural 9. You might have the sharp 11, and you might have the 13. You won't have the sharp 5, flat 13. You won't have you won't have these, the flat 9, sharp 9, or the sharp 5, flat 13 options. Let me grab that eraser, which I will need momentarily. All right, so in terms of minor 7, it's kind of similar to the major 7. You'll find the add 9. You'll almost never find flat 9, sharp 9. You won't find the add 11. You will find the add 4, or add 11 rather. And you won't find that on the major or the major, minor 7 because those have a major third, and the regular 11 would be a minor second away from that, which is just too dissonant. But in a minor 7, it's a minor third, so that makes it a whole step away. So it's a little bit easier on the ear, and you'll find the add 13. So these are the kind of upper structure sonorities. So if we go from the minor 7s and we say here's with a 9. Here would be with like an 11 sound in it. The add 13 is the least common. It sounds something like this. Someone like jazz pianist Bill Evans would use this. And for major 7 sonorities, here's with the 9. Here's with the sharp 11. Here's with the 13. In terms of major minor 7, here's with the flat 9. Here's with the sharp 9. James Brown and stuff would use that kind of sharp 9, amongst others. Here's with the regular 9. Here's with a sharp 11. Here's with a 13. Here's with a sharp 5 or flat 13. And we know we're going, and that's a minor triad with a 9, no 7th. So I think that's Morrison is coming out of this language. And in Cinema Paradiso, he's not getting into the 9s and the 11s so much, and he's interspersing it with triads, which jazz would usually just use 7th chords, even when they go to a 1 chord. Now, when we get to Copland, Copland uses a different format. He will use something that we'll call like pan-diatonic, which pan means all. Diatonic, we know, is just the notes that are in the scale. But he would often organize things in fifths. So instead of stacking thirds, he might do something like C, G, D, A, E, B. And that gives us 6 out of our 7 notes, right? Let me do it a little higher so it's not quite so muddy. So you could say, oh, look, it's a major 7 sonority with a 9 and a 13, right? So you could try to say, oh, look, C major 7, add 13. Or actually, let me say, I guess you would write it 9, 13. The problem with that is that for something to sound like a major 7 sonority, the 3rd and the 7th normally have to be voiced lower. And you put the upper structures on top, hence the word upper structures. When you invert that, it no longer really sounds like a C major 7, add 9, add 13. It sounds like something different. So Copland would use this kind of harmonies. And then he would move them around, usually in parallel motion. And those are all fifths, so parallel fifths galore. So some of the rules that we've talking about, this is a very different harmonic language that Aaron Copland is using. But it's beautiful and it's pretty and it feels like wide open spaces and grass fields that extend as far as the eye can see and billowy clouds in the distance. So it's a really wonderful language. So I hope that helped you out a little bit, Elton, in terms of giving you some ideas. We got another question here. So you can say that major, major 7 and minor, minor 7 are used as an embellishment chord in a musical context. Embellishment chord. Embellishment chord. Yeah, embellishment. So I guess you could say that. Pretty much anytime you're using a 7, so the word embellishment implies that there's something that's the primary and that there's something that's extra, that's added on, okay? So there's a core. And how you set up what the core is can be a little tricky. So if you set up the core like a lot of jazz music does, and where your core equals 7th chords, that's your foundation, that's the language you're going to use, then I would not call major 7 and minor 7s embellishment chords. They wouldn't. But most of the music that I've been talking about is based on classical music, Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, where the triad is your core. And when the triad is your core, the 7th chords, the 7th on top of that will sound like a little something extra, like an embellishment, like a little extra coloring to the harmony. And when we get to people like, let's say, Brahms, I think Brahms would be a great example where the word embellishment chord would be appropriate, where it's primarily triadic structures, but he then starts using your 4 major 7 sonorities, and it sounds like something colorful and an embellishment. So I think that's the key thing to keep in mind, what that word embellishment means, that you have a chord, and what is your, or you have a core, and what is that core? And it can be different. It can be a triad, it could be a 7th chord. They both will work. So depending on which one is which, the word embellishment might or might not apply. All right. Oh, Gabby, you got me. You got me. You're right. There are 2 half-diminished chords, not only one. Yes. You know, if you were a student of mine, this is what I do in my classes. I'm not the kind of teacher who just, you know, wants to, I don't need to seem like I'm right all the time. And I want to be kept honest. So I tell my students, if they can catch me making a mistake in writing, I will give them an extra bonus point. And I don't like to give extra credit. When students ask me, oh, Dr. B, is there any extra credit I can do? My normal answer is no, just worry about getting credit. Because sometimes students get all hot, you know, all worried about getting this extra credit, and they don't spend the time they should on the things that are the credit. Well, so I have a strong, you know, distaste for extra credit. So this is kind of motivates me. So Gabby gets +1 on her grade, right? Because there is a 2 half-diminished 7 in minor key, and then there is the 7 half-diminished 7 in major key. So when I was listing how many different minor 7 sonorities and major, and I was saying, oh, the major minor 7 only has 1, the diminished 7 only has 1. I was wrong. I mistakenly wrote down that half-diminished 7, there's only 1. There's 2. So thank you, Gabby. I appreciate that. So Elton, that's a great suggestion. I think that's great. So we can edit them into separate questions. That's a great idea. So what I should do is I should hire someone to do that, because there's no way that I have the time to do that at this juncture. But I do have, you know, I do have the money to hire former students who have got some video editing skills to kind of put these into pieces and make them more digestible. So that's a great idea. The other thing that I used to do that I've just run out of time to do is I used to list all the questions in the topics. So if you wanted to be like, oh, what's this one about? You could look very quickly what topic, what questions I was asked and what I responded to. And I haven't done that for the last like 10 videos or something. So I'm writing this down because that is a good idea, and I should look, and I have someone in mind who might be able to do that. So edit it into single questions. And that would allow it for people to kind of go through them and see them, because I recognize that the current YouTube live structure is not very searchable, right? I have like the main one topic or whatever I start with, but after that, you got no idea what's there. So for someone who wants to, let's say, revisit a question, because I know a lot of you and a lot of us, we watch a video once and that gets us started and we kind of understand it, but you got to often watch things more than once. And if you have a question and you're like, oh, I need to rewatch it, which video was that in? There's no way to tell at this point. So that's a great suggestion, Elton. I'm going to see if I can get someone to work on that and start putting it into pieces so the questions are more easily searched, rewatched, and things like that. Great suggestion. I appreciate that. I got another person saying, yes, the vocal teacher makes all the difference and they are worth it, but underappreciated for their exceptional skills. Yeah, a vocal coach, you know, it's like separate than a voice teacher. The voice teacher usually is dealing with the mechanics of how your jaw tension, tongue position, where the resonance happens in your face, repertoire, performance techniques of those pieces. Whereas the vocal coach is really kind of like putting the polish on the performance, making sure that you're coordinating with the accompaniment correctly, And then we'll spend time dealing with phrasing and things like that. But we'll also talk about things like, how to put your headshots together and how to present yourself in the audition format. So there's a little bit of overlap, but there is a lot of difference. So well said. Akash is asking about some of my favorite jazz sax players. Well, it's so funny. You should look up Brelock's The Millbrook Independent, which is the article, that interview that just came out. Millbrook Independent. Because this was exactly one of the questions that I was asked for this interview. And I will tell you exactly who I answered. I answered Michael Brecker. Michael Brecker was a saxophonist that was really kind of started off in the 1970s, but then was active into the 2000s. And the reason I like Michael Brecker is that his technique is so good. He can play so fast and so clean on the saxophone. It's dazzling. The perfection of his technique and the energy that he achieves. So he uses his chord substitutions. So he'll put, just like when we're talking about Hemiola, where you put one meter on top of another meter to build up energy, he'll do that kind of with harmonies. So almost like polychord type of idea. So chord subs. He'll in his extended techniques. So he'll play like super high. He'll break the note. So normally, like if you're like a beginner and you accidentally get like two notes at the same time, that's a mistake. What Michael Brecker will do is he'll figure out how to do that mistake on purpose for dramatic effect. So he'll like crack a note so it just feels like this like energy that's like bursting out that can't be contained. So all these different extended techniques, and the emotion is just it gives me this feeling of just being dazzled and like awe-inspiring. It's just like the sense of awe that you get from listening to him. I then mentioned Dexter Gordon. Dexter Gordon is a saxophonist. Started off more like in the 40s, but mainly 1950s through the 70s plus. Like this was his prime time, shall we say? And I love Dexter Gordon for his warmth and just feeling good. Like his music just feels good. It's not too fast. It's not too slow, and there's a sense of fun. He'll do a lot of things called quoting. So he'll be playing one song, and he'll play another song at the right harmony. So you'll be like going along this like intense jazz song, and the energy's popping. Then he'll he'll like play "Pop Goes the Weasel" for a second, and it gives it this sense of fun. So I really love Dexter Gordon's music. And then finally, John Coltrane was the other saxophonist I named. His dedication to the craft of being a musician is just outstanding. I've read a number of biographies about his life, and whenever I feel like I'm working hard, I read more about John Coltrane, and I feel like I'm slacking. His work ethic was just off the charts. And his evolution as a musician, starting off in kind of like with Miles Davis, and I love a lot of his stuff that he's doing with Miles, and then to his second quartet with Elvin Jones that I was talking about. I love that stuff. I'm not a huge fan of his kind of third phase where he gets more into a free jazz side of things. Not my favorite, but I certainly respect that he was always trying to do something different and come up with something new, and that push I do respect, even if I don't particularly enjoy the product of that last phase. But this alone is more than enough to be impressed by. And I have a lot of others, but those are some of those were the top three I named. Common tone diminished seventh chords. Okay. So common tone diminished seventh chords. Let's talk about that. Here's a situation where terminology is a little unstandardized, not standardized. So I'm not 100% sure what you mean by common tone diminished seventh chords. So you want to clarify in the chat. I'll look down in a moment, but I'm going to get started with what I think we're talking about. So any diminished seventh chord, let's go with like B diminished 7, would be B, D, F, A flat. What's unique about diminished 7 sonorities is that every interval is the same. This is different than other seventh chords that are a mixture of different intervals. And I talked about this recently. This A flat to, well, wait a minute. So B, D, D, F, F, A flat. So this is an augmented second, right? A flat to B. But we know augmented second is enharmonically the same as a minor third. So it's enharmonically the same as a minor third. And so it has this kind of unusual structure. And because of that, you can rewrite it to be a D diminished 7, where you would just say D, F, A flat, C flat. You can rewrite it to be a F diminished 7, which would just be F, A flat, C flat, E double flat. And you can rewrite it to be an A flat diminished 7 chord, which would just be A flat, C flat, E double flat, G double flat. And we can rename them, and we can take any of these and rename it enharmonically, because so A flat diminished is not usually the way you're going to see it. You'll often see it as a G sharp diminished 7. So I believe what's being asked is that you can take any one of these notes. Let's take that A flat or G sharp as a common tone and say, I have a, and then switch to any of those other ones in terms of how it functions. So you could be going along. And here I'm going like it's a, let me see. Let me actually go to here. There's my B diminished. And then that's my common tone G sharp. And now I'm going to treat it as a G sharp diminished 7 and resolve to A minor. Let me do that again. Here we are in C minor. Here's my B diminished. Now I'm going to treat it as a G sharp minor. They're going to use that kind of like, they're kind of all common tones, which is why I'm a little confused by their naming. Then I go to A minor. So C minor triad, F minor triad, C minor with G in the bass. Let me go to B diminished, becomes G sharp diminished with B in the bass, A minor, D minor, E7, A minor. So I think when being asked about this kind of common tone diminished 7, that we're talking about that structure, that unique structure for the diminished 7 chord, and the fact that you can kind of enharmonically call them different names. You can, all of these are kind of like we were saying for the other 7th chords, like, so this would be a 7 diminished in the key of C minor. This would be 7 diminished in the key of E flat minor, 7 diminished in the key of G flat minor. Let's call this G sharp diminished just for, because it's A flat is not really where we would be. We're not really going to go to B flat double minor, so we would say A minor here. And this could be E sharp diminished in the key of F sharp minor if we go enharmonically. So I think we're talking about that when we talk about the common tone aspect of the fully diminished 7. So I'm going to scroll down here and see if there was a clarification from Danielle. All right, so I think I probably answered that one correctly in terms of what was being asked. So good, good, good. All right. So let's keep moving forward here. Okay. All right. Here's a question. Someone was saying, with the pandemic, I'm really thinking of an alternate career. I've worked as an event photographer for many years, and all that is gone with the pandemic. I'm too late to start thinking to study musical cinema arrangements. So 50 years old, what academics should I consider? So I think I talked a little bit about this in one of my earlier videos, that I don't think it's, there's certain things that you're too late to do. If you're 50 years old, the chances of you having an international career as a performer are not high. It takes a long time. There's that idea of, to become a master, you need to put in 10,000 hours. And, when you're a little kid like Mozart and your dad, your mom is making your meals and doing your laundry and your dad is teaching you all day, getting in 10,000 hours, it's not such a challenge. As a 50-year-old, even an out-of-work 50-year-old, getting in 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, that's no small feat. Let's say you're doing, even if you're saying, I'm going to do 10 hours a day, right? That means you need 1,000 days. We're talking 3.5 years. 3.5 years straight of really spending 10 hours every day working on music. That's not necessarily an investment most of us can do, to just spend 10 hours a day for 3.5 years so that we can become an expert. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's improbable for most people in most situations. So you're saying that you think having an alternate career as a composer, did you say? Study, I think, musical cinema. So to study, well, again, so if you were going to be, let's say you wanted to be a film composer, that probably, that's going to be a hard one, right? The thing to do is always look for emerging technologies, right? So when apps first became a thing, this was a gold mine for composers. And by gold mine, I don't mean actual making lots of money, but opportunity to write stuff and get it out there. Because the apps were, all these free apps, they needed people to write the music, and it didn't necessarily, sometimes it probably paid and sometimes it probably paid nothing. But you had an opportunity for people who weren't 100% established into an industry to be able to do something. So phone apps, this was a huge kind of great thing for young, not even young. By young, I mean in terms of time, not necessarily age, right? Less experienced composers to be writing something. And then, the video games was another area where there was opportunity for less established composers. It didn't pay as well. It wasn't as prestigious. Therefore, there was opportunity for less experienced people to do it. In terms of where you go now, if you're starting, you know, accompanists are always needed. Someone who plays piano who can back up other people. And you can take some piano lessons and you can be practicing, and you don't need to practice 10 hours a day. And you could actually get decent, especially if you're, depending on what style of music. If you're looking to do, like, you know, at church, all these churches need someone to play piano or organ. Like if you want to play organ, that's a little bit harder because you got the whole feet as well. But there's there's just not a lot of people who are doing that. So you kind of want to look at where there's not a lot of supply and where there's at least some demand. So jazz saxophonist, I have to be honest, there's a high supply for the amount of demand. So that's not where I'm able to make my bread and butter. Church organist, church accompanist, working with choirs, working with singers, that's certainly work you could do. I think if you were involved in writing, composing music, because of the technology available, I don't think it's too late to get into kind of like composing for TV, commercials, things like that. You know, using things like Pro Tools or Apple Logic. You know, there's people who basically write music and then upload it to this database, and then when, let's say, the Nature Channel is looking for, we need music for as the cheetah is chasing the antelope, and they listen to some stuff, and there's composers who've put like chase music, animal chase music, or whatever, right? I don't know all the categories. But if you post your stuff up there and then one of these networks decides they want to use your music, you can make some money. So I think musical cinema arrangements composer, that's a long shot. And I'm not saying you shouldn't pursue it. I'm not saying you shouldn't try it. I'm trying to say, what other steps between where you are now and there should you take? And I would recommend writing stuff for these kind of big TV data banks where, like, so I think there's opportunity here because we're living in an age where there's all these content producers. You know, like Netflix didn't used to produce content. There's like Peacock is a new service. We have, Hulu. All these they're all generating content. So it's spread out. All the kind of like history, documentary channels, home and gardens, HGTV, all this content wants music. And so if you could start getting into writing stuff using the software, which means you could do it on your own, you actually might be able to have that. And then who knows, if you really learn and you really get good at what you're doing, who knows, maybe film music arranging might be in your future. So I hope that helps. And just keep in mind, there's so many ways that you can be involved with music. Event photographer is awesome, and you could be an event photographer who specializes in music festivals, and you get in that circuit. But let's say you need to be working remotely, and you're looking for that kind of that option, especially as things are as they are currently. Video editors, right? I'm thinking about academia. Like all of us music teachers in colleges and high schools, we're all trying to get our students to record videos on their phones by themselves and then stitch it together into a Brady Bunch video. So your event photography knowledge and your eye and your attention for that detail and the idea of lighting and all that type of stuff could be used in the service as a music video editor for all the high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. They're all looking to do that. There's a market there. There's an opportunity. So I think there's some creative ways that you could look to pivot in a career and make music a part of it, either from that side point or the business, marketing, promotion, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of money in terms of how music is made and how it's distributed, and not all of it goes to the performers, right? A lot of it goes to the people who are making that go where it's getting it to the people. So, hope that helps. You know, an academic career, as Caleb is suggesting, academic careers, it all depends where you're going. Collegiate positions are very competitive in music, with the exception of new and emerging fields. So if you're going to be a classical composer, there's not a lot of openings. If you were to be a composer of, let's say, commercial music or what they call like studio composition, there are some programs. There's not a lot, so there's not a lot of demand, but it's a fairly new, it's more of a new field in terms of some colleges are trying to do. So there might be opportunity there, but you need to build up a resume, and you pretty much have to have a doctorate in music to be competitive. Some exceptions are like in the Midwest in the United States, where it is a little less competitive, but anywhere on kind of like the East or West Coast, you really need a doctorate to be competitive. There are exceptions. Sometimes in musical theater, for instance, musical theater is an emerging area for colleges, and so sometimes if you only have a master's degree, you can definitely get a job as someone with just a master's. The other is, you know, working in more of the kind of staff area. So all these music departments and stuff, they need administrative assistants, people who know about music, who can do stuff. So for example, I hired an administrative assistant at my college, and that person does underscoring for some of our promotional videos. So they're composing, and they need to, as well as filing contracts and paperwork for all sorts of various things. So there are some options depending on what you're looking to do. Got another question here. We've got melodic minor scale for improvisation. Thank you for the whole we love it. Okay, melodic minor scale for improvisation. Yes, good question. So ascending melodic minor is what we're really talking about here. Ascending melodic minor, specifically for improv. So if we take C, D, E flat, let me not try to write too quickly here, E flat, F, G, A natural, B. I'm not going to write anything. What chord would this best fit? It's going to be a C minor major 7, which is not a very common sonority, but sometimes you find it. Horace Silver is a jazz pianist who wrote a piece called Nika's Dream. And it starts off with a minor major 7 to another minor major 7 chord a whole step below. And so this scale, the first mode of the ascending melodic minor, would be perfect for that kind of chord. So Horace Silver's Nika's Dream. If we start on the D, just use the same notes. This is not a mode that really is commonly used. It's got that minor 9. It's essentially a minor 7 arpeggio, not really used. If we start on the E flat, F, G, A, B, C, D, this is used a lot. Not a lot. It's used some. So this would be for an E flat, major 7, sharp 5. Okay, which sounds like this. So this is very much a sound that was used by like jazz guitarist Pat Metheny and a lot of the kind of European jazz. So there's a label called ECM, which had Keith Jarrett, who's actually American, but was over there doing a lot. So Keith Jarrett, people like Jan Garbarek, I should say. And I know you probably maybe can't see all that because it's written kind of small. So I'll try to write a little bit. Garbarek. So this kind of major 7 sharp 5 is something that was 1970s jazz, kind of common then. So it's a little bit more contemporary, not your traditional jazz. Then if we go to starting on the F, so F, G, A, B, C, D, E flat. This is used for an F7 sharp 11. It's sometimes called Mixolydian sharp 11. So they take the Mixolydian scale. It's exactly like the Mixolydian scale, except a sharp 11, which is 11 is the same as a 4, but up the octave. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 4 and 11 are the same. But the 11 is just up the octave. And remember what I said, the 3rd and the 7th of a chord are usually lower than the upper structure, so that's why we call it an 11 and not a 4. So Mixolydian sharp 11. This is a little more common. So you might have something like this kind of sound. So Mixolydian sharp 11. If we start on the G, so that would be the 4th mode. 5th mode, starting on the G, G, A, B, C, D, E flat, F. This one is not commonly used. 6, if we start on the A, B, C, D, E flat, F, G. This one is often used on half-diminished. Actually, let me start writing up because it's getting way too small. And I'm standing in the way, so none of you can see it. My apologies. I'm going to get a darker marker. All my markers are starting to run out, but I guess because I do so much music theory. So let's move that up here. I'm going to erase that here. I'm going to recopy A, B, C, D, E flat, F, G, used on a half-diminished 7 chord. It's called Locrian natural 2 sometimes. So it's like a Locrian scale. And so we have so normal Locrian has a flat 2. It's the 7th mode of a major scale. So diatonically, your 7 half-diminished chords has that minor second, but the minor second is such a dissonant interval that sometimes it gets raised. And it's okay because then you don't have the B flat rubbing against the A, so it gives it a little prettier sound, but it is outside of the key, so it makes it a bit colorful. And then finally, we've got, if we start on B, C, D, so this one's used a lot. This would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to erase that down here because I copied it up there. 6, that would be 6th mode. And then finally the 7th mode, B, D, B, C, D, E flat, F, G, A. This one's used a lot. It's used on B7, sharp 5, flat 9 kind of chords. So let me rewrite it so that you can see why. I'm going to erase this part here. So B, C, let's call the D C, C double sharp, and I'll show you why. It's called the E flat, a D sharp. I'm going to keep the F and an F. We're going to, I guess we can call it, instead of calling it a sharp 5, let's call it a flat 13. It's enharmonically the same. So what we have is 1, flat 9, sharp 9, which is why we have two C's, flat 9 and sharp 9, major 3rd, sharp 11, flat 13, 7. It's the minor 7. So this is used on a dominant chord that's resolving to 1. So, so we get that dominant to our 1 chord. And this is the most common way in which the ascending melodic minor is used. It's also called the altered dominant scale, because it's a dominant chord that's been altered. Altered dominant scale. There's some other names for it, but that's the most common. So that gives you a whole bunch of common uses of the ascending melodic minor scale and how they're used for improvisation. Keeping in mind you're looking for like what's your root, your 3rd, 1, 3, 5, 7, and then what kind of upper structures there. Some of them are not commonly used, so if we remember 1, that's used. 2, not so much. 4 is pretty commonly used. Did I say 5 is not. 2 is not. 3 is, sometimes. So I'll give it a check. 6, 7. So really just 2 and 5, the modes are definitely not used. 3 is uncommon. But 4 is very common. 1 is not that common because you don't find that sonority very much. So I guess the most common would be 4, 6, and 7. Okay? Those are the ones that are most commonly used. 4, 6, 7. And I'm talking about modes of the ascending melodic minor scale. All right. Ed, welcome to the channel. I appreciate the thumbs up. Yeah, Derek, I hear you. If this is too much, we're talking about pretty complicated stuff right now. So if you're saying this is too much, and I am assuming what you mean is in terms of just too much information, and I'm talking quickly, so I know that. What I do recommend you do is you go back and watch some of my earlier videos. You can always start with lesson 1, work your way forward, and if you're like, oh, I can skip forward, you can skip 1 or 2, that's great. And then you can always pause, because I do talk very quickly. I'm trying to get as much information to people. What's nice about the video format is you can rewind, you can go back. Don't worry, you can figure this stuff out. It's complicated, it's challenging, but if you go kind of step by step, you will get there. So good luck with that. How do you count quintuplet, sextuplet, and septuplet? So quintuplet, sextuplet. Sextuplet is the most common of the 3 options. So quintuplet, so sextuplet, 6 divisions within a beat. So if we have, let's say, quarter note as our beat, you will see music that looks like that. So if you're going along 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. I had to slow down a little bit. I know I didn't keep my beat steady. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Or you can just kind of keep that triplet feeling and just double it up. So if you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and da 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 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So you can count all the way to 6. You can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, keeping that triplet feel. Just make sure that that is your pulse. And you always start slow, and you build up from there. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so that would be how you count sextuplets. I don't really, once we get into here, we don't start, like, unlike 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, or 1E and a, 2E and a. I'm sure people have invented other things to say. They're not commonly used like 1E and a, 2E and a is for 16th notes. So 16th notes, 1E and a, 2E and a, common. Something for sextuplets, quintuplets, septuplets, not common. They exist, they're just not commonly used. Next most common will be your quintuplet. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's nice about the sextuplet is that it's, this would be 1. You still got your downbeat, and it's that duple subdivision because it's going to fall da 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 da. It's like it's symmetrical, right? It comes at 3, 6. Quintuplets are an odd structure. So if we have beat 1 here, the and comes right halfway in between the 3rd and the 4th note of the quintuplet. So if we're going 1, 1 and 2 and dot, so you got to get dot dot dot. So let me think how I do this. Hold on a second. What dot dot. So dot 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 dot. So I'm trying to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's, I'm clapping 1 and 1 and, or whatever, and it's going halfway in between. That's how it's structured. So you get 1, 2 and a half, then half, 1, 2, and that's how your quintuplet goes. Usually when people are figuring out quintuplets, they just count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just get that feeling there. If you're teaching a child, you use an animal like hippopotamus. So hippopotamus, 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 or any 5-syllable word will do. So that's often how quintuplets are counted. Septuplets are 7s, also very unusual. And there's no specific way other than just counting up to 7 that you use for that. And here it happens, the and happens right in between the 4th and the 5th one of those notes. So if you were to do it really slow and count 7s, you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. You can't say 7, right? Because 7 is 2 syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And that's how you would subdivide it to really get down to the nitty-gritty if you needed to. All right, so I hope that helps. My doctor had to remove a hemiola. Now I got COVID. Yeah, I know. Hemiola definitely sounds like a medical condition, no doubt. Gabby says, what a nice accident. Yesterday my guitar teacher gave me a new piece to learn from Latin America, and it has a hemiola rhythm. Yes, good. Now you'll enjoy learning it even more. Glad to hear it. Got regards from Kenya. That's awesome. So Pranav, I don't really know how to answer your question on how to use the Bach chorale book in the best possible way. I don't know that book particularly well, so I don't have great advice on how to use it. Obviously, you can always analyze the sheet music and do that. But beyond that, I'm not quite sure how that book is set up. You can always shoot me a picture from one of the pages and see. Live streams with intellectual professors committed to literacy is where. Thank you, Prince Jordan. I appreciate it. I appreciate that. You can dance. That's fair. You don't necessarily need to call me an intellectual before you hear my compositions. I'm not primarily a composer. I have composed, but it's not my main thing. I did it a lot when I was in my 20s and 30s. And let me see, where can you hear my stuff? It's not really available online. I'm primarily an arranger, and so if you want to hear my arranging, which is different, right? It's not the same. I took the unpublished version of Aaron Copland's Quiet City. We were talking about Copland earlier today. So he wrote Quiet City for a play that was on Broadway. And the play got canceled before it opened. And so he took, about a third of the music and he turned it into an orchestral version. But the other 2/3 of this music that was originally written for a chamber ensemble of just 4 musicians has been unpublished. And that's what I did for my dissertation. So I got the unpublished music and I basically had to restructure it so that you could actually perform it, because just having cues for a play, it had no dramatic context, no continuity. So I had to rearrange the pieces. I had to make sure all the links and the transitions worked. I had to do some orchestration so that it sounded like a balanced chamber ensemble. But Aaron Copland originally wrote this for trumpet, clarinet, clarinet doubling on saxophone, which is why I got into it, and piano. And you can type in Copland, Quiet City, and my name, Brelox. Now it's Copland's music, it's his composition. I don't claim any genius there. But if you think that piece of music holds together and it sounds like something that flows, that's me. And Copland, what I had was basically like 30-second to 1-minute segments, and the whole finished thing is about 15 minutes plus. And so being able to try to get something that has continuity, that was a big challenge. So I do a lot more in terms of arranging. Now, music intellectual can certainly be broader than just being a composer. Most music theory teachers aren't composers. Most performers aren't composers. So when you use the word intellectual, you're talking about someone who's thinking about the different aspects of how things go at a high level. And so absolutely, I think go ahead. I'm totally fine with being judged. I don't have a problem with being judged. I think that if you judge me, you'll say, okay, I would call myself an intellectual in terms of music, especially my research. So the areas of music history. Music historians tend to be called intellectuals, but they're not composers. So my research in music history, my music theory work, and then of course my arranging that I do, all would typically be put under the intellectual category. So you go ahead, listen to my version of that. Tell me what you think. Philip was saying, why not 6/8? I'm sure this was referring to back when we were talking about Hemiola, so I'm not quite sure where that's going. I'm not quite sure what that's referring to at this point, because we're a little bit down the road. So I'm going to skip forward. So I gonna skip over. So you can dance, and Prince Jordan, proof is in the pudding. Look for the pudding. All for it. I go that way. And Prince Jordan, in terms of students kind of, you know, are there certain serious issues in college learning, music included, in terms of people just kind of like following the herd mentality? Absolutely, absolutely there is. There's often issues with kind of independent thinking, and you know, I've said this before, not every piece by Johann Sebastian Bach is a work of genius. Not most people would be comfortable saying that, because Bach is, you know, obviously way more of a genius and intellectual than I am, hands down. So you could say, well, who are you to criticize? Well, the answer is, I'm someone who's lived hundreds of years after him, and it's my job to look back at history and evaluate it. That's the job of a music historian. And so I think you both have a lot of points there. So, right. For melodic minor in contemporary music, do you recommend playing it melodic up and natural down? No. Or playing melodic up and down? Yes. For contemporary music, use the same up and down form for the melodic minor. It really only changes when you're talking about more traditional Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and even then, it's not a hard and fast rule, because it depends on what the harmony is underneath it. So when you say ascending, can you ever go down the ascending melodic minor scale in classical music? Yes, right? That's all going down the ascending melodic minor scale. Why? Because I'm on the 5 chord, and the 5 chord needs to have that sound. So this is a tricky thing about the ascending melodic minor and understanding minor keys. The ascending melodic minor is particularly useful for the 5 chord. Going up or down, you use the same form. If I played a 5 chord and you went down the natural minor, it doesn't sound right, right? This is the harmony. Right? The direction melodically works, but it doesn't work with the harmony, because you get that, you get this. That's way too dissonant. And then when you get to the 1 chord, then you go down the natural form. So that's kind of like the secret sauce for melodic minor scales. All right. I got another one. Currently, I am close to the end of your video series, lesson 38, secondary functions to be specific. I learned a lot. Do you think species is a good way to practice these concepts? So I think you're talking about species counterpoint. So yes, species counterpoint is an awesome way to practice some of these things. And I have some videos after my lesson videos that talk about species counterpoint. I think I have 2 of them. And just so you know, some music theory curriculum introduce species counterpoint during the first semester. So after like really early on, before you get to 4-part writing, there's some people who deal with species counterpoint. And I can understand the reason for that, because understanding how those 2 melodic lines go together and how the harmonies line up in terms of consonance, dissonance, yeah, that's very foundational. And historically, species counterpoint was really coming into play earlier than the 4-part harmony writing. So there's 2 different approaches. I don't use that approach, in part because that's just what's more common around where I am living. But I think there's value in both approaches. So absolutely study species counterpoint. I've got 2 videos up for you already. Got the question, is the study of solfege important? Can't we just do stuff with note names? So note names aren't very useful. Solfege is better than note names. And let me tell you why. There's really, for training your ear, there's really 2 methods that are the best. Or there's 3. 2 I think are better, and 1 a lot of people in Europe think is better. And they might, you know, I would love to sit down, like I would love to have Dr. B Music Theory, have someone who disagrees with me on one of these things, and like have a conversation about it. I think that would be so much fun. So there's movable do and fixed do. So like in France, they use fixed do. And fixed do means that the note C equals do. And so in this sense, could you just use note names? The answer is yes. So I should rephrase that. So fixed do, is there a difference between using fixed do and letter names? Not really. Right? So you got, so F is always fa, G is always so. Doesn't matter about your key, right? So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do is connected to actual pitches, not how they function in the key. With movable do, it changes from key to key. So if you're in G major, do is now a G. So movable do is connecting the word do with how it functions in the key. And with fixed do, it is connecting do with the letter name. So could you just use the letter name? Yes. For movable do, could you just use the scale degrees? Yes. So when I did my undergraduate degree, we did not use solfege syllables, but we did use essentially movable do, but we just used the numbers. So we would just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then if we went to a different key, we would do the same thing, but in the different key. That's essentially the same thing as do, re, mi, fa, so in movable do. But if I was using fixed do, I'd go re, mi, fa, and it's a raised fa, but I just do that in my head. Re, mi, fa, sol, la, and that would be movable do. Or I could go D, E, F, G, A. So those are your connections. I teach movable do with solfege. And I don't think it's necessarily better than doing with numbers, but I do like function better than connecting with letter names. But there's some people out there who have great ears who prefer it the other way. And I'd love to hear all their arguments as to why they like that or why they think that's better for training your ear. The end result is being a great musician with good ears. And so the question is, which one of those methods, what are the pros and cons of those different methods, and which one's the best overall, or are they comparable? And so I lean towards movable do, but I'm open to being swayed. All right, we're going to wrap this up pretty soon, folks. Someone's asking harmonization in bossa nova songs. So I think that might be a big enough topic that I don't want to tackle right now. I'll give you a quick, I love bossa nova songs, and Antonio Carlos Jobim is the king. And you can look up some of his pieces. They're using the seventh chords as their basic foundation harmonically. Has a lot of the jazz influence harmonically. There are a few differences. They do use a little bit more in terms of the sharp 11 than most jazz does, in part because it's evolving a little bit later in terms of, like, jazz starts off a little bit earlier, and as it evolves, you do get sharp 11s, but the bossa nova, right from its get-go, has the sharp 11 in it. They also have a few more, like they use the fully diminished chord, so diminished 7 chords are a little bit more common as well in terms of harmonizations. But if you were to go ahead and look at a couple Antonio Carlos Jobim songs, that would probably be a great way to start looking at it. Look in terms of root movement from note to note, and whether whether it's whether you can figure out what key it's in. They tend to be a little bit more complicated and a little bit more sophisticated. So I would need to sit down with a song to really give you an in-depth analysis. And that might be something I'd be willing to do down in the future because I do love that music. So everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for the awesome questions. Thank you for correcting me when I make a mistake. And I hope you all have a great 2 weeks, and I hope you come back in 2 weeks and get some more music theory, ask some more questions. Apologies to those of you who I didn't get to answer your question, but I do have a full schedule, and I'm glad I was able to take some time out today and join you and talk more about music theory, which I love so much. Be well, take care.